It was a chilly Tuesday evening in early autumn. The orange glow of the setting sun cast long shadows over a quiet town just outside of the city. The streets were calm, the leaves rustled gently in the wind, and most people had begun to settle into their evening routines. But inside a well-known restaurant called the Silver Leaf, the night was just beginning. The tables were perfectly set, the silverware shined under the soft lights, and the sweet smell of roasted herbs floated through the air. The place had an elegant charm to it, one of those restaurants where the rich like to dine and talk business over glasses of wine. Among the staff preparing for the dinner rush was a young waitress named Emma. She was in her mid-20s, always dressed neatly in her black uniform with a white apron tied around her waist. Her hair was usually tied back in a low ponytail, and her eyes carried a softness that made her instantly likable. Emma didn't talk much, but when she did, her voice was gentle and polite. She moved quickly and quietly between the kitchen and the dining room, always doing her job with care. Emma wasn't like the other waiters and waitresses, who often chatted, joked, or complained during breaks. She mostly kept to herself. Some people thought she was shy. Others thought she might be hiding something. Nobody knew where she had come from or what her past was. She never spoke about it. Her co-workers sometimes asked about her family or what she did before coming to Silver Leaf, but she would always smile softly and change the topic. The truth was, Emma's life hadn't been easy. A few years ago, she had been a promising student at one of the best music academies in the country. She played the piano like it was part of her soul. Her fingers used to dance across the keys with passion, her melodies bringing tears to listeners' eyes. People said she was born to be a concert pianist. But dreams, no matter how beautiful, sometimes break under the weight of real life. Emma had to leave everything behind when her mother fell seriously ill. Her father had died when she was just a teenager, and her mother was all she had left. With mounting hospital bills and no one else to take care of her, Emma made a heartbreaking decision. She packed her bags, said goodbye to her music, and moved to the town where her mother was receiving treatment. She took up any job she could find, and eventually she landed a stable one at the Silver Leaf. She never told anyone at the restaurant about her musical past. The piano that stood silently in the corner of the restaurant's lobby haunted her. Every time she walked past it, it was a beautiful instrument, polished and perfectly tuned, but no one ever played it. It stood like a forgotten ornament, more for decoration than purpose. Still, Emma would sometimes pause and glance at it, remembering the way her fingers once used to bring life to such keys. But she never touched it. Not even once. One of the regular customers at the restaurant was a man named Victor Klein. He was a successful businessman in his late 40s, always dressed in expensive suits, and wearing a watch that probably cost more than a year of Emma's salary. He came to the Silver Leaf almost every week, usually with business partners or wealthy friends. He was loud, arrogant, and had a sharp tongue. While he was polite to his own group, he often treated the restaurant staff like they were invisible, or worse, entertainment. Victor had a habit of making fun of the waiters, teasing them, asking them uncomfortable questions, and laughing when they fumbled. Some staff members secretly called him King Victor because of how he acted like the restaurant was his kingdom. Emma, who usually served his table, always remained calm around him, no matter how rude or dismissive he became. One particular evening, Victor arrived with a group of clients from out of town. The restaurant was buzzing with activity, and Emma had just started her shift. As she brought over menus and glasses of wine to his table, Victor seemed to be in an unusually boastful mood. He was telling stories, cracking jokes, and trying hard to impress his guests. The topic of conversation soon turned toward success and talent. "I tell you," Victor said loudly, sipping from his glass, "talent is overrated. Most people are just ordinary. Look around. How many hidden geniuses do you think are out there waiting tables?" He waved his hand dismissively. "None. That's the truth. If they had any talent, they wouldn't be serving steak." they'd be out there in the world, doing something great. His friends chuckled, and a few looked around the room amused. Emma, who was nearby refilling a glass of water, heard every word but kept her face neutral. She had heard worse before. She just focused on her task. Then one of Victor's guests pointed toward the grand piano in the lobby. "That's a beautiful piano. Anyone here actually know how to play it?" Victor smirked. "You're joking, right? What are the chances a waitress or dishwasher here knows anything about Beethoven or Chopin?" His eyes scanned the room and landed on Emma. "You there?" he called out, his voice carrying across the room. "You look like someone who might have a hidden talent. Tell us, can you play the piano?" Emma paused, unsure of what to say. The room grew quiet, eyes turning toward her. "I used to play," she said softly, almost wishing she hadn't replied. Victor's eyes lit up with amusement. "Oh? Now? That's interesting. Why don't you play something for us? Come on, impress us." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She looked at the piano, then back at Victor. "I haven't played in years," she said. "I'm really not—" Victor interrupted her. "Oh, come on, don't be shy. This could be your big moment." He laughed, and his friends joined in. "Besides, we could use a little entertainment while we wait for dinner." It was clear that Victor didn't expect anything good to come from this. He thought it would be funny, a joke. He wanted to embarrass her in front of his table, and everyone else. Emma stood frozen for a moment. Part of her wanted to walk away. Part of her wanted to scream. But another part of her, one that had long been asleep, stirred inside. A small voice said, "Why not?" Not for Victor, not for the guests, for herself. She nodded slowly and walked toward the piano. The restaurant fell into silence. Even the clinking of forks and spoons stopped. Some customers watched curiously. Others looked uncomfortable. A few of the staff stared in disbelief. Emma sat down on the piano bench. Her hands were slightly shaking. She hadn't touched a piano in years. Could she still play? Would she remember? Would she mess up in front of everyone? She closed her eyes. For a moment the sounds of the restaurant faded away. She wasn't in the Silverleaf anymore. She was back in her childhood living room, her mother sitting on the couch, smiling proudly as little Emma played her first recital piece. She was back in the academy, practicing from morning till night. She was back in the auditorium, under the lights, playing her heart out in front of a crowd that held its breath. And then she placed her fingers on the keys. At first she just played a few soft notes. Then her hands found their rhythm. The melody began to grow, unfolding like a story. Her touch was gentle, yet filled with strength. The notes floated into the air, like magic, weaving a spell over the room. Victor, who had been sipping his wine and waiting for a laugh, slowly lowered his glass. The restaurant was silent. And Emma played on. Victor sat back in his chair with an amused look on his face as he watched Emma slowly rise from where she had been standing. His smirk widened as if he had already written the ending to this little drama in his mind. He imagined the waitress, sitting down nervously, fumbling over the keys, making an awkward noise, and then hurrying back to her corner, embarrassed and humiliated. That's how it always went in his world. People like him, the rich and powerful, controlled the stories, while people like Emma were only extras in the background. But what Victor didn't realize was that this time he had started a story he couldn't control. Emma's feet felt heavy as she walked toward the piano. Every step seemed to echo louder than it should. The room was silent now. Conversations had stopped. Forks were held mid-air. The air inside the restaurant felt tighter, like everyone was holding their breath. Even her co-workers froze. Some of them looked worried for her, others confused. No one had ever seen Emma like this. Usually, she quietly did her job, never raising her voice, never stepping into the spotlight. And now, all eyes were on her. She approached the piano and paused. For a moment, she just stared at it. The polished black surface reflected her face faintly. Her fingers trembled as she reached out and gently ran them over the keys. They were cool to the touch. She sat down slowly on the bench. The leather creaked under her weight. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Her palms were sweaty. Her legs felt weak. Victor leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, whispering something to his guests. They chuckled softly, already preparing to enjoy what they believed would be a silly, awkward moment. The kind that made for great gossip, over expensive wine. To them, Emma was just part of the furniture, another quiet face in the background of their lives. Emma took a deep breath. Her hands hovered over the keys, uncertain. Memories rushed back to her, crashing into her like waves. Her first music teacher's soft voice, her mother's warm hand on her shoulder, the long nights at the music academy when her fingers bled from practicing, the applause that once followed her performances, and the silence that followed after she walked away from it all. She didn't know what she was going to play. She hadn't prepared anything. She hadn't touched a piano in years, but something inside her stirred. An old part of her, buried but not dead. Her fingers found a chord. The sound rang out, clear and steady. At first she played softly, simple notes, almost unsure. But as the keys began to respond to her touch, the music inside her returned. Her fingers started to move faster. The melody grew, filling the restaurant. It wasn't just music. It was emotion. It was a story she had never spoken out loud. A story of sacrifice, love, pain, and strength. Every note carried a part of her that had been locked away for years. Victor's smile began to fade. His eyes narrowed slightly as he leaned forward. The guests at his table stopped whispering. They stared at Emma now, their amusement turning into something else, something closer to amazement. A couple seated at a nearby table set down their glasses and turned toward the piano. The chef peeked out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. The hostess near the front door forgot to greet a couple walking in, too mesmerized by what was happening. Emma's co-workers, who had been standing frozen in disbelief, started to move closer. One of them, a young waiter named Josh, whispered to another, "Did you know she could do this?" The other shook her head silently, her mouth slightly open. Emma, lost in the music, no longer noticed the crowd. She wasn't playing for them. She wasn't playing for Victor. She was playing for herself. For the part of her that had been buried under hospital bills, double shifts, and years of silence. For her mother, who had once told her, "No matter what happens, don't let go of your music." She transitioned into a more complex piece, one she had memorized long ago. Her hands flew across the keys with precision and passion. Her body swayed slightly as she played, lost in rhythm. There was pain in her music. There was beauty. There was everything. When she finally struck the last note, her hands dropped gently into her lap. She kept her eyes closed, letting the sound linger in the air. The room was completely still. Then, a single clap broke the silence, and another, and another. Within seconds, the restaurant erupted into applause. People stood from their seats, some whistled, others clapped so hard their palms turned red. One woman wiped a tear from her eye. The applause went on and on. Emma opened her eyes, unsure of what to do. She stood up slowly, gave a small nod, and turned to walk away. She didn't want to stand in the attention. She just wanted to go back to her life, but her life had already changed. Victor sat frozen. His face was pale. His fingers tapped nervously on the edge of the table. His smirk had completely disappeared. For the first time in a long while, he had been silenced. His plan to humiliate someone had backfired so completely that he couldn't even bring himself to speak. One of his guests leaned over and said, "I think you owe her an apology." Victor didn't reply. Emma returned to the counter where she usually stood and picked up a tray, trying to act like nothing had happened. Her coworkers approached her slowly. "Emma," Josh said, his voice filled with awe. "What was that?" She gave him a small smile. "Just something I used to do." The manager, Mr. Reed, who rarely said much unless something went wrong, approached her with wide eyes. "Emma, that was extraordinary. Why didn't you ever tell us?" She shrugged. "It's not something I talk about." "But why not?" another server asked. "That was amazing." Emma looked down at her hands. "I had to stop a long time ago. Life happened." That night, after her shift ended, Emma walked home in the cool night air. The streets were quiet again. She pulled her coat tighter around her and kept her head low. Her mind was still swirling with emotions. She had played again, really played, and it felt like waking up from a long dream. When she got home, her mother was sitting up on the couch, a blanket over her knees. "How was work?" her mother asked gently. Emma hesitated, then smiled. "Different." She told her about the piano, about Victor, about the music. Her mother listened quietly, her eyes shining. "I told you," her mother whispered. "It never really leaves you." Emma sat beside her and took her hand. It was like something inside me opened up again. "You've always had that light," her mother said. "They just never saw it until tonight." Emma looked at the window. The town was still, but inside her, something had changed forever. Back at the restaurant, customers were still talking about the performance. Videos had been taken. People were already posting them online, tagging the restaurant and asking, "Who is this girl?" Victor Klein sat quietly in his car in the parking lot. He stared at the dashboard, the engine running but unmoving. His pride had been hurt in a way that money couldn't fix. He had tried to shame a girl who had more talent in one hand than he had in all his flashy business deals. And the world had seen it. What he didn't know yet was that the story was only just beginning. Emma's music had finally broken free, and it wasn't going back into silence. The next morning, Emma walked into the restaurant as usual, dressed in her simple black uniform and hair tied back neatly. She carried herself with the same quiet grace she always did, but something about her felt different now. The night before had changed everything, even if she hadn't fully accepted it yet. The way people had clapped, the way the music had poured from her fingers, the way she had lost herself in the moment. It had all felt so real, like touching a piece of her old self she thought was gone forever. As she stepped inside the Silver Leaf, a strange silence greeted her. Usually mornings were filled with soft chatter from the early shift or the clinking of coffee mugs. But today, her coworkers stood in little groups, whispering, holding phones, looking up at her with wide eyes. Josh, the young waiter who had always been kind to her, rushed over with excitement in his voice. "Emma, you won't believe it. You're all over the internet." She blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" He held out his phone. And there, on the screen, was a video of her sitting at the piano, her hands moving across the keys. It had been filmed from a customer's phone. The title read, "Waitress stuns rich customers with unbelievable piano performance." The video already had thousands of views. There were comments flooding in, words like incredible, pure talent, goosebumps, and this girl needs to be discovered. Emma stared at the screen, feeling a mix of fear and disbelief. Why did they post it?" Josh grinned. "Because it was amazing. People are saying you should be in a concert hall, not waiting tables." Emma shook her head slowly. "No, I didn't mean for anyone to film it." More co-workers gathered around her, sharing their amazement. Some were genuinely proud of her, others a bit jealous, but all of them were shocked. She had kept her talent hidden for so long that it now seemed unreal. Later that morning, Mr. Reed, the manager, called her into his office. Emma stepped in nervously. She had never been called in before unless it was something serious. He gestured for her to sit. Emma, I've got to say, I've never seen anything like what happened last night. That piano, nobody touches it. I honestly forgot we even had it. And then you just sat down and played like you'd been born doing it. Emma smiled awkwardly. It just happened. Well, Mr. Reed said, folding his hands on the desk, we've had a dozen people call the restaurant today asking about you. Someone from a local news station wants to do a story. Even a music blogger reached out. You're becoming a bit of a sensation. Emma felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. I didn't want attention. I was just trying to get through the night. I understand, Mr. Reed said, softening his tone. But maybe this is something you should think about. People see talent in you. Real talent. Emma left the office feeling overwhelmed. Her mind was spinning. She had buried her dreams so deep that she never thought they would find the light again. And now, in the blink of an eye, the world was watching. At home that evening, her mother was sitting with her phone in hand, tears in her eyes. She had seen the video too. You played so beautifully, her mother whispered. I'm so proud of you. Emma sat beside her, laying her head on her mother's shoulder. It scared me. I didn't mean for it to happen. But it did, her mother replied gently. And maybe it's meant to. For the next few days, people came to the restaurant not just for the food, but to see Emma. Some customers asked her to play again. Others took photos or asked for her name. A man even tried to hand her his business card, saying he could connect her with someone in the music industry. Emma kept refusing. She didn't want to step back into that world. She had walked away for a reason. Her mother's illness, the pressure, the money they never had. It was all still real. Music had once filled her life with joy, but it had also broken her heart. And then one day, Victor Klein returned. He walked into the Silver Leaf dressed as he always was, in a sharp suit with a gold tie pin and polished shoes. But his face was not as confident as before. There was a stiffness in his walk, a quiet tension in his eyes. Emma spotted him the moment he entered, and for a second, their eyes met. He didn't smirk this time. He simply nodded and took his seat. Emma, though nervous, approached his table to take his order. Good evening, sir, she said politely. Victor looked at her for a long moment. Then he finally spoke. Emma, I owe you an apology. She froze, surprised. Those were not the words she expected from him. I was rude, arrogant. I tried to make a joke at your expense, but the joke was on me, he said quietly. Your performance. It was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years. Emma said nothing for a while. Then she gave a small nod. Thank you, Victor continued. I have some connections in the arts world. If you ever want to get back into music professionally, I can make a call. No tricks, no conditions, just help. Emma smiled politely but didn't answer. He nodded again. Fair enough. After taking his order, she walked back to the counter, her mind heavy with thoughts. She didn't trust Victor. Not fully. But his words had been different this time. Less prideful. More human. That night, after work, she walked to the park near her home. It was quiet, the stars bright above her. She sat on a bench and thought about her life. The little girl who once dreamed of playing on grand stages. The teenager who gave it all up to care for her mother. The waitress who had hidden her gift like a secret treasure. She realized something as she sat there in the cool night air. She didn't have to become famous. She didn't have to chase money or fame or return to the exhausting competitions. But she didn't have to stay silent either. Her music still lived inside her. It was a part of her. And maybe it was time to stop hiding it. The next evening, at the Silver Leaf, Emma quietly walked to the piano during a slow moment in the dinner rush. No one had asked her to. She simply sat down and began to play. A soft melody floated into the room, and the diners paused, heads turned. The staff stopped to listen. Emma wasn't playing to impress anyone. She wasn't nervous this time. Her music flowed gently, peacefully. It was honest, real. After she finished, there was a gentle round of applause, not as loud as the first time, but warmer somehow. A man approached her afterward and said, "You've made our evening special. Thank you." Word began to spread that the waitress at the Silver Leaf sometimes played piano during dinner service. More and more people came to hear her. A journalist came to write a story. A small local radio station interviewed her. A woman from a nearby community center invited her to perform at a charity concert. Emma accepted the invitation. She performed on a small stage at the community hall in front of a modest crowd. Her mother sat in the front row. Emma wore a simple dress, no makeup, no fancy lighting. Just her and a piano. She played with heart, and the crowd responded with love. She felt something that night she hadn't felt in years. Peace. After the concert, a little girl came up to her and said shyly, "I want to learn to play the piano like you." Emma knelt down and smiled. "You can. Just don't give up." As the weeks passed, Emma's life didn't suddenly become glamorous. She still worked at the restaurant. She still took care of her mother. But she played regularly now. At the restaurant. At the community center. Even at a few weddings. People came to know her not just as the waitress who played piano, but as Emma, the musician, the girl with a gift that could touch hearts. And somewhere in the background, Victor Klein quietly supported her. He never made a show of it, but he donated money to the community center. He sent a new piano to the Silver Leaf. And once, anonymously, he paid off part of her mother's hospital bills. Emma never went looking for revenge. She never needed to. Her music had done something far more powerful. It had humbled a man who thought he ruled the world. And more importantly, it had awakened her own soul. She had found her voice again, and this time she wasn't letting it go. Emma's life began to flow in a way that felt peaceful, honest, and deeply fulfilling. Each day at the Silver Leaf was still filled with the usual routines, serving tables, smiling at guests, refilling coffee cups. But there was a new layer to everything now. Her music had returned to her like an old friend she had forgotten, and it had slowly started changing the way she saw herself. What began as a humiliating moment set up by Victor had bloomed into something she never expected. She hadn't planned to become known, and yet people from the town started coming in just to hear her play. Some would come in quietly, order a cup of coffee, and sit close to the piano, hoping it was one of those evenings when Emma felt like playing. She never made announcements. She just played when her heart told her to. There was no pressure, no spotlight, just music, flowing through her like it used to when she was a young girl sitting at the small upright piano in her living room. Back then, her world was filled with dreams of concert stages and standing ovations. But the world had been harsh, and those dreams were buried beneath the weight of reality. Now, however, those dreams weren't calling her back in the same way. She didn't want fame. She didn't want the chaos of the big city or the competition. She had found something better, something quieter but more beautiful. She had found herself. One evening, as she finished her shift and prepared to leave, Mr. Reed approached her near the back door. He looked a little nervous, rubbing his hands together as he spoke. "Emma, someone left a note for you at the front desk." She took the small white envelope from his hand. It was plain, with her name written in elegant handwriting. She opened it and read the letter inside. It was from a woman named Caroline Fletcher, a well-known music teacher and former concert pianist who now ran a respected music school in a nearby city. Caroline had seen the viral video and had heard about Emma from a colleague who had attended the community concert. The letter was simple, heartfelt, and kind. Caroline invited Emma to visit her school, not for an audition, not for judgment, but for a cup of tea and a conversation. She wrote, "Sometimes the world forgets to listen to quiet voices, but I heard yours loud and clear." Emma folded the letter and held it close. For a few moments she stood in silence, her heart full of emotions she couldn't explain. It wasn't about an opportunity. It was about being seen. Truly seen. A week later, Emma took the train to the city. It was the first time in years she had left town for something that wasn't medical or work-related. As she sat by the window watching the world rush past, she thought about her mother, who had encouraged her to go. "You don't have to accept anything," her mother had said. "Just go and talk." When Emma reached the music school, she was struck by how different it was from the intimidating institutions she remembered from her youth. It was inside a large old building with ivy climbing the walls, and the air smelled like old wood and new music. Caroline Fletcher welcomed her with warm eyes and a gentle hug. She wasn't like the stern teachers Emma had known. She was calm, graceful, and wise. They sat in her office over tea and cookies, talking not just about music, but about life, choices, and the quiet strength it takes to start over. Caroline didn't ask Emma to play right away. She simply listened. When Emma finally told her about her past, about her mother's illness, about giving up the piano for so long, Caroline just nodded. "Real musicians are not made on stages," she said. "They are made in the places where life tries to silence them, and they still find a way to sing." Emma did play, later that afternoon, in one of the small practice rooms. It wasn't a performance. It was a conversation between her and the piano. Caroline listened from the corner with closed eyes, smiling. Afterward, she didn't offer her a contract or a job. Instead, she said, "The doors here are always open to you. Come when you want. Teach, learn, rest, play. No pressure." Emma returned home with a peaceful heart. She didn't need to change everything. She didn't need to leave her life behind. But she had found a place where she belonged, a new community, a new path that didn't erase her past but honored it. Back at the Silver Leaf, the buzz around Emma began to settle. The viral fame faded a bit, as all internet things do, but the real change had already happened inside her. She no longer played to prove anything. She played because it was her language, her truth. One rainy afternoon, a mother brought her young son into the restaurant. The boy had autism and loved piano music. The mother explained quietly to Emma, "He doesn't speak much, but music helps him feel calm." Emma smiled and gently led the boy to the piano. She sat beside him and began playing a soft, dreamy tune. The boy's eyes lit up. He placed his hand on one of the keys and pressed it shyly. Emma nodded and played along. For 10 minutes, they made music together. Simple, beautiful, real. When the boy left, he turned around and waved. His mother was in tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You gave him a moment of joy he'll never forget." Moments like these became the real music of Emma's life. She started giving free lessons to kids who couldn't afford classes. Once a week, she held a small group at the community center, teaching them the basics of piano and encouraging them to find their own voice. Victor Klein, surprisingly, stayed in touch in quiet ways. He never tried to interfere again, but Emma found out that he had sponsored a small scholarship at the music school in her name. It was called the Quiet Spark Grant, for students who had talent but lacked opportunity. She didn't speak to Victor much, but she understood now that people could change. Maybe her music had touched something in him that even his wealth couldn't fix. As time passed, Emma's relationship with music became more open, more free. She played at local events, helped other musicians, and even recorded a few original pieces with the help of friends. She wasn't famous, but she was known, and more importantly, she was happy. One evening, as she sat at her old keyboard at home, her mother beside her, she played a lullaby she had written when she was 17. It was soft and full of memories. Her mother closed her eyes and hummed along. "Do you ever think," her mother asked gently, "what would have happened if that man hadn't asked you to play that night?" Emma smiled. "I think I would have kept hiding. Maybe forever." "But you didn't," her mother said. You faced it, and you lit up the world. Emma looked out the window. The night was dark, but the stars were shining. She thought about everything, about the fear, the shame, the dreams lost and found, about Victor, about the people who clapped for her, the little boy who smiled when she played, the students who now looked up to her. Her journey hadn't followed the path she once imagined. But maybe that was the beauty of it. Life had given her something unexpected, something real. She placed her hands on the keys again and played. Not for an audience, not for attention, but because the music was hers. And this time, it would never be silenced. Again. Emma's life had transformed in the most unexpected way. From being a quiet, humble waitress at the Silver Leaf to becoming the town's beloved pianist, her journey had taken many surprising turns. But what made her story truly special was not just the attention she received or the viral video that brought her talent to the world. It was how she stayed true to herself throughout everything. Months had passed since that night when Victor Klein tried to humiliate her. That one moment, which was supposed to embarrass her, had instead brought her closer to the piano, the love she had pushed away for years. Emma had learned to live with music again, but this time, on her own terms. She hadn't let the fame change her. She hadn't chased money or recognition. She had simply allowed her gift to shine, and people had naturally gathered around her light. The community now saw her not as the quiet girl behind the notepad, but as the woman who could move hearts with her fingers. Her weekly lessons at the community center had grown. More children were showing up, their curious eyes eager to learn. Some of them came from poor homes. Some struggled with confidence. A few had never even touched a piano before. But under Emma's patient guidance, they began to feel the magic of music. She didn't just teach them notes or scales. She taught them how to listen, how to feel, how to believe in themselves. One of her students, Maya, was only 8 years old, but had already been through more than any child should. Her father had left, and her mother worked 3 jobs just to keep the family going. Maya barely spoke to anyone, but whenever she sat at the piano with Emma, her fingers spoke volumes. Emma noticed the way the girl's whole expression changed when she played. It reminded her so much of herself. One day after class, Maya stayed back. She looked up at Emma and asked in a soft voice, "Did anyone ever tell you that you were wasting your time?" Emma was taken aback. "Yes," she said quietly. "Many times," Maya nodded slowly. "They tell me that too. That music won't feed me. That I should do something normal." Emma kneeled beside her. "Sometimes people say those things because they're scared. Not of you failing, but of you flying." Maya looked into her eyes and whispered, "I want to fly." Emma hugged her, holding back tears. "Then you will." At home, Emma's mother was slowly recovering. Her treatments were working, and her energy had returned little by little. On the weekends, she would come to Emma's small community concerts. She would sit in the front row, proud and smiling, watching her daughter shine in the soft glow of the spotlight. Emma often looked at her while playing, knowing that this woman had sacrificed so much to give her strength. Victor Klein, who had once mocked her, had now become one of the quiet supporters in the background. He never tried to befriend her again or force his way into her life, but he did continue to send donations anonymously to the music school and the community center. Emma knew it was him, and though she never thanked him in person, she understood that his heart had shifted in a way only music could cause. One afternoon, Emma received a surprising letter. It was from a well-known concert hall in the nearby city. The director had seen videos of her performances and had heard about her from Caroline Fletcher, the gentlewoman who ran the music school. The letter wasn't flashy or demanding. It was simple and respectful. They invited Emma to perform at their spring charity gala, a special night that raised money for young musicians from low-income families. Emma held the letter in her hands for a long time. It wasn't fear that held her back. It was the question. Was she ready to return to a big stage? The memories of her past still lived in her. Nights spent crying after auditions, the sting of failure, the weight of pressure. But those memories didn't scare her anymore. She had faced them. She had grown stronger because of them. She spoke to her mother that night over dinner. "They want me to perform at a concert hall. A big one." Her mother smiled softly. "And do you want to?" Emma looked down. "I think I do. Not for the stage. Not for applause. But because it would help raise money for kids like Maya." Her mother reached across the table and took her hand. "Then go. Play your heart out." The weeks leading up to the concert were filled with practice, nerves, and quiet excitement. Emma didn't hire a stylist or a manager. She didn't call any reporters. She stayed true to her ways. Simple, focused, and real. The night of the gala arrived, and the hall was filled with people dressed in elegant clothes, sipping drinks under chandeliers. Emma stood backstage in a simple dark blue dress. She didn't wear much makeup. Her hair was tied back neatly, just like on her Waitress days. She held her fingers together, breathing deeply. When her name was announced, there wasn't much clapping at first. Many of the guests didn't know her. She wasn't famous in their world, but as she walked on stage and sat down at the grand piano, there was a calm that fell over the room. She began to play. The first notes were soft, like a story being whispered. Then they grew stronger, filled with emotion, rising and falling like waves. She played pieces she had written from her soul, some joyful, some filled with pain, others full of hope. She played the song she had once written as a child, and the one she played for the little boy at the restaurant. And finally, she ended with a new piece, a tribute to her mother. When the last note faded, the room was completely silent for a moment. Then the applause began. Not polite clapping, but a rising storm of appreciation. People stood. Some had tears in their eyes. Emma stood up slowly and bowed. She didn't smile for the attention. She smiled because she had played honestly. After the concert, many people came to meet her. Some asked about her music. Some asked for lessons. One man from a record company offered her a deal, but Emma gently declined. She thanked them all with kindness, then returned home the next morning, where her real life waited. Her students, her mother, her town. A few weeks later, Maya performed her first solo piece at the community center. She played with trembling fingers but never stopped. Emma watched from the side with tears in her eyes. When Maya finished, the room filled with cheers, and the little girl beamed with pride. After the performance, she ran up to Emma and asked, "Did I fly?" Emma hugged her tightly. "Yes, Maya, you flew." As time went on, Emma continued to teach, perform, and inspire. Her life was still simple in many ways, but it was rich with meaning. The piano had become more than an instrument to her. It was her voice, her healer, her bridge to others. Every now and then, someone would come into the restaurant and recognize her. They'd say things like, "Aren't you that girl who played at the gala?" Or, "Weren't you on that video?" Emma would just smile and nod. She wasn't trying to escape her past anymore. She wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. She had found peace in being herself, in the music she made, in the lives she touched, in the quiet power of being real. And so the girl who once hid her hands from the world now used them to open hearts. Her story didn't end with a record, deal, or flashing lights. It ended with a life full of quiet beauty, built note by note, with courage, honesty, and grace. Because sometimes the most powerful music doesn't come from the loudest stage, but from the heart of someone who refuses to stop playing.